John Wilkinson again, and History Made Easier again. And this is my third video on the rise to power of Stalin. And in this video, I'm going to focus on his character, his style, and his motivation. I'm going to use Richard Overy's book for much of this video. His book, The Dictators, which also looks at Hitler as well as Stalin. And I'm going to begin with an insight to the way in which Stalin operated and where that came from. This is what Overy writes. Stalin was an evident product of the long years of underground politics, the years during Tsarism, where trust was hard to establish, political spies and provocateurs everywhere, secrecy and self-reliance a second nature, and betrayal a daily fact of life. He absorbed the values of the underworld and brought them, honed by the harsh experiences of the Civil War, to the practice of high politics. In the 1930s and 1940s, as the Soviet Union's dictator, he behaved as if infiltration, concealment, betrayal, and bitter party-splitting arguments over ideology and tactics, the material world of underground politics, somehow functioned still in the mature environment of a one-party state. Nonetheless, the older Stalin became a more effective and settled personality than the angry young man of the underground. He exploited the limitation of his personality. His glumness became imperturbability. His awkward diffidence was transformed into unaffected modesty. His stilted speech-making evolved into slow, deliberate, wry presentation, which could last for 3 or 4 hours. His facial expressions gave few clues to the state of mind beneath. Only his yellowish-brown eyes, which never lost the habit of darting to and fro as though searching for the vulnerabilities of those he met, revealed to guests the alertness of the mind behind the outward calm. Now I'm just going to break off from Richard Overy there and go back to Martin Bullock, because there's an absolutely super insight here into the way Stalin operated at meetings. This is what one of his colleagues writes. It's a description of the way Stalin operated. He smoked his pipe and spoke very little. Every now and then he would start walking up and down the conference room, regardless of the fact that we were in session. Sometimes he would stop right in front of a speaker, watching his expression and listening to his argument, while still puffing away at his pipe. Intimidating, I think. He had the good sense never to say anything before everyone else had his argument fully developed. He would sit there, watching the way the discussion was going. When everyone had spoken, he would say, "Well, comrades, I think the solution to this problem is such and such." And he would then repeat the conclusions towards which the majority had already been drifting. I think that's a brilliant insight into the way he operated. It must have been scary. But I'm going to finish with another extract from Richard Overy's book. And this is what he says about Stalin's motivation. Where am I? Let me just check where I am. Yeah. His working methods evolved with his personality. He was never the mild party clerk of popular myth, the bureaucrat turned dictator. Bukharin, the editor of Pravda and a principal victim of Stalin's later purges, picked out laziness as Stalin's chief trait, a view that fits ill with the image of a tireless official outdistancing his rivals by dint of administrative stamina. Stalin worked tirelessly. And then he goes on to explain his motivation. Any account of Stalin's life raises the question of what it was that impelled him forward. His post-Glasnost Russian biographer, Volkanov, assumed, as common sense might dictate, that it was power. The more power he accumulated and kept in his hands, the more power he wanted, he wrote. Robert Tucker, in his classic biography, assumed that what Stalin wanted was not only power, but fame. Glory remained his aim. Bukharin and Trotsky saw Stalin driven by profound defects of personality, envy, jealousy, petty ambitions. Stalin left almost no account of his motives. He once remarked during the Civil War at the successful defense of the Volga city of Tsaritsyn that he would willingly sacrifice 49% of the city if he could save the 51%. That is, save the revolution. He may have been driven by envy to ruin more successful or ambitious men around him. He may have liked the plaudits of dictatorship, though there is much evidence that he deprecated his extravagant glorification. But the one consistent strand in his activity was the survival of the revolution and the defence of the first socialist state. Power with Stalin seems to have been power to preserve and enlarge the revolution and the state that represented it, not power simply for its own sake. The ambition to save the revolution became for Stalin a personal ambition, for at some point in the 1920s, perhaps after Lenin's death, Stalin came to see himself as the one Bolshevik leader who could steer the way with sufficient ruthlessness and singleness of purpose. His instinct for survival, his unfeeling destruction of thousands of his party comrades, his Machiavellian politics point not to a personality warped by self-centered sadism, but to a man who used the weapons he understood to achieve the central purpose to which his life had been devoted since he was a teenager. The consequences of that singleness of purpose for Soviet society were profound and harrowing, but for Stalin, they must have seemed justified by the one overriding historical imperative: to construct communism. And so, there you have my three videos, my three insights into the rise to power of Stalin, the battle to succeed, the leadership of Lenin. I think, as I said earlier, I think it adds to your knowledge of the different rounds of the battle, the way in which Trotsky was isolated, the way he used Kamenev and Zinoviev and then dumped them, the way he used Bukharin and then turned on Bukharin and then reverted to the policies of the left. There's his Machiavellian politics. But I think you can see where he was coming from. You can see that battle took place in a very confined arena, and you can see that the legacy of Lenin was always a major factor. And the fact that Lenin left nothing clear was a major factor, I think. So I hope these videos have been interesting for you. I hope they're useful for you. I hope they build on your understanding of Stalin's rise to power. As always, I thank you for listening, and as always, I remind you to check out my History Made Easier website. But for now, cheers.